Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So for today's little sketchbook doodle session, I do have a sketch prepared already in my sketchbook. You can see it on the right side, and the reason why I'm not doing it on the left side quite yet is just because there is a little bit of ghosting or a little bit of another sketch on the other side, so I don't really want to botch it with ink. So let's move on to the materials. I have my palette Color ENO, which I used for the sketching portion for both the left and the right side later. Then after that, I switched to the Ohuhu fineliner drawing pens in 0.2 and 1.0 so that I can get a varied thickness in my lines. So today we are going to be working with ScreenTones, which means I need my deleter tone knife so we can cut out the screen tones placed on top of the drawing. And here is my variety of screen tones. I do have the list of the screen tones that I use in the little card above. I'll make sure to put it in the description as well. But basically, let's do some inking of this sketch first. And the sketch is of Ike Evelyn just because I thought it'd be fun to do something that had enough different values for me to use the screen tones, but also to have just like a good amount of black versus gray versus white in the entire piece. So for the majority of today's video, it will be mostly in real time for this particular piece. So I'm starting off with the 0.2 fineliner pen, and I'm basically going to do almost the majority of the inking with this single pen. You can see that whenever I want line weight variation or I want to kind of like thicken up any lines that I would like to, I'm kind of manually doing that and not doing it in like one stroke, just because I don't know, it's easier for myself, and I do find it a little bit more fun to have that control. I guess not fun, but I do like having the control of being able to vary the thickness depending on, you know, how much I want to put down, rather than being very conscious of very much keeping either my hand very light on the paper or putting more pressure to get a thicker line. But for the most part, for fine liner pens like these or any kind of like technical pens, they tend to not really have like very much variety of the thickness that you can get. You basically get like a very standard line, and you can probably just get it to taper ever so slightly, I guess. So you can, if you like work quicker, you can kind of like flick the pen and make it a lot easier to kind of get that tapered line, but you can't really get like a thicker line. So I definitely find it easier to just darken it up like as you go. Even though I've been doing Inktober for the last, I guess it's basically 20 days at this point, and there's about like a week or so left of Inktober and October in general, I have been feeling a little burnt out with working with the ink that I've been using and the brush pen. Even though like I don't really enjoy doing line work too much, or just like the process of it, I kind of find it a little bit tedious. I have been missing using these kind of fine liner pens and just using a bunch of different ones to make a art piece, rather than relying on just the one pen to do it. And I feel like because I'm using the one brush pen to do all my Inktobers, I've been feeling a little bit burnt out. I've been feeling tired of, I don't know, messing around with the brush, either because of the inconsistency or like how I have to hold it to get like certain kind of line quality. It might be also a little bit that I haven't sketched out the prompts prior to working on each individual piece, which probably would alleviate a little bit of that pain, because I do think I spend a little bit too much time on some of the pieces because I end up having to sketch first and then inking it later. Probably for the last few days, I'm going to try my best to sketch and prepare that in advance, so I don't have to kind of like wait for myself to get to the inking portion, so I can kind of get it out of the way a little bit quicker. But for some reason for today, and I guess like I already knew I was going to do this earlier this month, that I wanted to do some screen tones. I wanted to do as much line work as I could with the 0.2, but I did want to have some areas with black. So I was debating whether or not I was going to use the 1.0, which you're seeing me use right now, and I'm using it in conjunction with my 0.2, so we can kind of get a more kind kind of like a flat black and then have it slowly transition into more of that hatching of those like straight lines, so you can kind of like let it fade out and kind of create a little bit more of that tone variation we can have in kind of a more monochromatic looking drawing. But the alternative would have been me kind of like filling in the flat black with my, I guess like the, what is this called? Is this the Pentel pocket brush pen? I keep getting like Pentel and Pilot mixed up, so I do apologize. I believe it's the Pentel pocket brush pen, and that would have provided a bit more of a matte black. And I was a little bit worried that me using the Ohuhu 1.0 pen and working with it back and forth, I've been kind of like trying my best to lay it like side by side and not do too much overlap where I can, just because I feel like the ink, or I don't know, it's just like, it feels like the more I layer up, the more the paper will pill, and then after the pilling, usually it means your paper is gonna rip because of all the saturated moisture and you're rubbing off the little paper fibers on top. And I wasn't really planning to really burn a hole through the thin paper, because the sketchbook is supposed to be like a notebook, so it does have that thinner, smooth, kind of like warmer paper. And I mean warm, I mean it's like very, it's like slightly yellowy compared to printer paper, so it has more of that warmer touch to it compared to maybe some previous sketchbooks that I've used in the past. And I don't know, I think it made it a little bit more apparent once I started using the screen tone, just because the screen tone is very much a neutral gray, I find. But I did do my best to kind of darken up any areas that I could, kind of with the flat black, because I wanted to have that much more apparent contrast by having some areas that are kind of flat black, and then some areas that we're going to have that is gray, and some areas that we're pretty much going to leave as just the white of the paper. So for the screen tones, I have a lot of like scrap screen tones. So a lot of the ones that I'm using are not like full pages. They're usually cut out from different pieces that I've worked on before. I'll leave some like of my previous videos that I worked with screen tones in the description if you would like to see them. I think I talk a little bit more in depth about how I use them, but pretty much I think I have like 6 different variations of screen tone. Majority of them have the kind of uniform dot pattern, obviously at different sizes and then at varied spacing, so that you can kind of get a different gray tone, if that makes sense. So basically the idea of using screen tone is that they have like a pattern of some sort to create your values. So a very popular way before is to, I guess, like do stippling in a way that you can kind of use dots to create value, as long as like you put the dots really close together or farther apart. It's kind of similar to hatching as well, but screen tone's kind of fun because it is kind of printed on these kind of transparent, kind of flimsy but very thin, kind of plasticky feeling sheets of whatever it is, and you can use the knife to kind of cut over it and peel it off to wherever you need. And the thing that I like about using these is that even though my lines are not like super thick, I feel like there's still a lot of wiggle room when cutting with the knife, because I'm not super accurate with it. And sometimes you'll probably see it at the end. There is sometimes that I was very heavy-handed when using the knife. Part of it is because like, well, the paper is super thin anyways, so I'm gonna leave a lot of indentations. But another part is that I forgot I changed my blade on my knife before using it. So the kind of like tip of the knife was very sharp, and it was having a very easy time cutting through the screen tones. And I feel like in a previous session I had a little bit more of a duller tip for the knife, so I did have to put a little bit more pressure, but this one definitely cut through the paper a little bit more easily. I definitely think if you watched, I think it's Gekkan Shoujo Nozaki-kun, so I think it's like, what is it called? Monthly Girls, I don't know what it's called. It's something, it's basically like this really tall, black-haired, kind of dead fish eyes looking mangaka, and then there's like a really cute kind of like, I think her hair is like more orange. Her name is Chio in the anime and the manga, but basically she has these really cute bows in her hair and she's trying to confess to this guy, but she's like a fan of his work but also really likes him and stuff. But this guy is like creating a manga and he's very oblivious to all her advances and stuff. But basically there's like a scene where I think Nozaki gets sick and Chio and I'm trying to remember who else was there. I think it's Hori senpai actually, that basically they were not able to do the screen toning for him because he was sick. He wasn't supposed to work on his manga, so Chio and Hori senpai would be working on the manga for him to see if they could help, you know, him not fall behind on his deadlines. But they found screen toning to be very difficult because I think Chio couldn't cut accurately, and then Hori senpai had to like much of a heavy hand, so he wasn't able to cut the screen tone to the point where he wasn't breaking the paper too. And then I think it's Wakamatsu who is the one who has like the perfect touch. He's also very accurate with the knife, and then he could do the screen toning for them. So I don't know, I love that anime and manga. It's so cute and the humor is like up my alley. So yeah, before I get too sidetracked, if you have a hard time with your screen tone sticking, I highly recommend you just use glue and glue it down. So the reason why it's that the adhesive on screen tone is, I feel like it's fairly strong, but it's also very easy for you to lift up because you need to reposition it or because you have to cut away and kind of peel it away from your surface. It's not super tacky. It's just enough that it would adhere to paper. So sometimes, because I reuse a lot of the screen tone scraps that I get from, you know, peeling it away from empty areas that don't need screen tones, and I usually save them for later on a scrap piece of paper or on the scrap backing that it comes on, I kind of lose that tackiness a little bit because the amount of times that I have to lift and remove it, and basically every time I'm lifting and removing, you're kind of getting rid of that tackiness slowly. That's like another way people also make things a little bit less tacky and sticky. So if you have like masking tape but you don't want it to rip your paper, some people like to put it on their skin or on another surface or on another piece of paper and lift it up a couple of times, like place it down, lift it up, place it down, lift it up, so that you can remove some of that tackiness before placing it down on a piece of paper that you're going to use it on, so that when you do decide to remove it, it's not going to like tear and rip. But yeah, I did have to glue down some areas just because I did lose a little bit of that gluey backing, I guess, of the screen tones. But for the most part, I don't think I had to break out any new screen tones. So initially, I bought screen tones to give to my friend to use, but it's been so many years that I haven't given it to her as like a birthday gift that I feel like she no longer really does like anything art related or drawing anymore. It was mostly like at the beginning of uni, I think, or right at the end of university, where I was like, oh, I feel like she's still into art and I feel like she would want to do, you know, have her hand at trying out screen tones and stuff, because she used to be really into like making comics, making characters, and she would usually color with like her various assorted kind of like Copic markers or whatever alcohol markers she had at the time. So I knew she would be interested in it, but I feel like so much time has passed that she's no longer that interested. So I don't want it to give it to her just for her to be like, oh, thank you. Probably won't use it that often. But so where was I going with this story? So I have like basically a duplicate of I think 4 of the other screen tones. So I think it's the 12, 13, 14, and the 6 that I have duplicates, because I was only going to give her like I think 4 or 5 different ones, and then I bought some for myself to give it a test. And basically, because I'm not going to give it to her, I do have extra ones now, because I think it's been like 6-ish years since I was planning on giving it to her, and I feel like 3 years passed since I've had these screen tones or something like that. I don't really remember when I got these, but yeah, I do have the extra ones now. But me using the scraps, I had enough to kind of fill up the certain areas that I wanted to use it in. Also, any areas that I wanted to add extra shadow, I just basically layered up a second layer of the same screen tone at the time. So for his skin, I wanted to double up on the same type of screen tone to make the shadow, and then on his jacket I also doubled up on the same screen tone so that I could do the shadows of the clothing folds. And it just makes it an easy way to layer up the values in a way that makes it feel a little bit less jarring, but also very noticeable because the transparency and then the texture of the screen tones are very apparent. Another thing that I decided to do, and I think is very common when working with screen tones, is that because the patterning or whatever is on top of the plastic, you can actually take your deleter knife or whatever sharp object you have to scrape the top of the plastic, and you can actually remove the ink. So I did that for his cheek. I also did that for the background to create a little bit more of a softer light coming in from the upper left. And that was basically it for the screen toned Ike, and we'll take a look at it a little bit closer at the very end. So for the left side, I'm already starting on doing the inking, is that I basically wanted to fill up the page with a few sketches of Ike as well, so that we can kind of match the aesthetic overall for the entire spread. But I did not want to commit to doing anything too intensive because, like I said, there's another spread on the back side where there is very little bit of ghosting, but I don't want to add so much black ink that I accidentally bleed through to the other side to ruin it, because if I can help it, I don't want to ruin the original look of the spread or whatever I worked on in my sketchbook if I can. Sometimes I don't mind, because if I don't really enjoy the sketch or I already knew that, you know, it was gonna get botched somehow, then I'll just let it happen. But because I know this one could have been prevented, I'm just gonna take a little bit of precautions and not make too many areas that have like a flat black. And you'll see that I will switch to the Pentel pocket brush pen to do a lot more of those darker areas, just because, like I said, if I decide to use the 1.0 Ohuhu fineliner and I go back and forth too many times on the same area, I'm gonna accidentally probably tear a hole into the paper, just because the ink will be saturating and making the paper pill, and then the fibers will lift up and eventually be so weak that I will drill a hole in my paper. So unfortunately, even though I liked my sketches for this side of the sketchbook, I kind of botched the inking, and I need to find a better angle to record these, because as much as I like having a close-up whenever I do things like inking, the camera is literally right in my face where I need to see the drawing. But to get a close-up as well of the inking, it has to be in my line of view, but also super close to the paper. And usually when I ink, I get a lot closer to the paper so I can, you know, put stuff down more accurately. And because of that, I feel like I didn't have a good view of where I was placing my lines. So I made his eyes really simple because I thought that I would make him look a little less derpy. And I don't know, I feel like I just botched the sketches. But you can see now that I've switched to the Pentel Pocket Brush Pen so that I can do some more, not exactly flat blacks, because you can see that it's very streaky, and that's happening because the ink in my little cartridge is not the original ink. I did replace it with a speedball ink because I needed a refill, but if I don't prime the ink a little bit by squeezing the cartridge, the ink flow doesn't flow as smoothly, so it becomes very splotchy and streaky. So you'll see a little bit later that on his gloves, on the right sketch of the left spread or left page, I will have like a darker area, and that's because when I squeezed the ink from the cartridge, I did an extra pass or a layer on it so that we can get a better kind of matte black look. But I decided not to do it everywhere just because I didn't have the patience to do it. So to match kind of the screen tones a little bit, I decided to take out my, these are the Tombow dual brush pens, and it's in the pastel set. There is a gray marker, but this gray marker is a little bit on the cooler side, And you can definitely tell next to the screen tone that now the screen tone looks very warm compared to these sketches. But I do like the aesthetic of just keeping things kind of monochromatic and like just basically just black, white, and gray, because I think that's kind of just fun to work with and it's very simple. So yeah, that's the little page on the left, so 2 sketches, and then we have our close-up of the one that I did with screen tone. And I think that's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed today's session, and hopefully Inktober and October is going well for you, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!